All right, well, welcome back. What we're going to do today is walk you through some of the tools that are available in PaintShop Pro to help you create kind of creative projects, whether it's, in this case, we're going to be walking through kind of postcard creation. But the key for this is really to kind of show you what more you can do with your photos, how you can start customizing them. We're going to talk a little bit about working with other things such as alignment tools and text and picture frames and kind of helping you discover some of the other features that are in PaintShop. Now, I am using PaintShop Pro X4. But again, some of the features I'll be showing you aren't just in this version, so I know some of you are coming in from previous releases of PaintShop, so no fear. You're going to be learning something here as well that you'll be able to make use of on your own. So what I'll do to begin with is we're going to go with this scenario of a winter postcard. And what I'd like to do is walk through some very simple examples and then show you some little more customizable options where if you wanted to combine multiple photos together, if you would like to start working with different backgrounds or text or layout options. So what I'll begin doing is I'm going to work with, just to start with, one particular photo, this family photo here. And again, I am in the latest version X4, so at the top I have access to my different workspaces. If you're using X3, you'll notice on the far right-hand side you'll have an option to go into the edit mode. So I'm going to do that now and go into this next workspace. So I'm just going to make sure that you can see my entire screen as I move back and forth. All right. So in this case, I am working with a single image because we're going to go ahead and show what is the easiest thing we can accomplish to create something that I would want to print and perhaps mail or share. So in this example, I have just one photo open, and what I'd like to do is the most kind of basic thing here. All I want to do at this point is add a picture frame to give it a nice border and perhaps add some text. So let's start really simply, and what I'll do is actually there's two places to look at this. In the menus at the top of the screen, you can go to the image menu. And in here you can access a number of features, and we'll be coming to these in a little bit. We'll look at canvas sizing and resizing and so on in a few minutes. But right now what I'm going to point you out to is the picture frame. So under the image menu, picture frame, we have a fair number of different types of creative frames and effects that you can use. Now, if you're not that familiar with PaintShop, you will have access to the Learning Center. Now, the Learning Center, mine's currently, actually let me close this, mine's currently closed, but I'm going to turn it on here so you can see. The Learning Center has been around for a number of versions, so what you'll find in here is essentially a good place to orient yourself to what are the most commonly used tools. And in the Learning Center, we have access to a category called Text and Graphics. And if you're wanting to go through the Learning Center, you can touch on the same tools that I'm going to be using today. So here we can access those picture frames and photo edges. We can also work with things like text, which we'll be doing very shortly. So that's available in the Learning Center. Actually, I can click that right here and I get to the very same dialog that we saw before. And you'll notice that on the Learning Center now it tells you step by step how to use this particular tool. Okay, so in my case, we have a drop down here. We have some very kind of classic frames, different types of faded edge borders or vignetting style. I'm actually looking for this particular snow one. It's a winter theme. We may as well kind of stick with that, and there's also a nice one next to it called Snowflakes. So again, you can kind of choose and you'll see a preview of how that picture frame will appear. So I'm going to go with this kind of border here, and of course the first thing you're going to notice is that it's not really going in the right direction. Trees don't generally grow in that direction. So what I'm going to do is use these tools at the bottom to kind of customize it so it makes sense for my particular photo. So I'm going to have it frame the layer of this image. I also want it to frame the outside of the image. Notice if I choose the inside, it's actually going to start cutting out some of that photographic area that I want to keep. So we're going to frame the outside of the image, and I'm going to rotate it. So now it fits a portrait versus a landscape. Okay, so I'm going to say OK, and it applies that frame to my photo. So that's fairly quick. Again, it's just a piece of content that's already in the application itself. So now you may notice, actually I'm going to get rid of this Learning Center for now to give us a little more space. You may notice over here now on the Layers palette, it's on the right-hand side, I have my picture frame and my photo in the background. So this is kind of handy if you wanted to perhaps turn on or off different elements to kind of see how they look. What I'm going to do is, again, keeping this very, very simple, what I want to do now is simply add some text into this area at the bottom. So to do that, again, I could go through the Learning Center to quickly access the tools that I want for text and graphics. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to come over to the Tools palette on the left-hand side. Now, I noticed that when a lot of you registered, there was a question on what version of PaintShop Pro you were using, and the majority of you were actually using this version here, X4. Now, my icons may look different than yours. Just recently, we were able to release a free update for X4, which included new workspace options. There's new camera profiles, new updates to some of the features, and again, based on what you were telling us, we went back and looked at those workspaces and customized them so that you have more flexibility. When you install this service pack, and you can access that through the Help option here. So if you go to the Help menu at the top, there's an option to check for updates. So if you haven't been notified or received an email about it, you can access it here. And that'll give you options to not only change the color of your icons, but also this gray background, being able to adjust your workspaces to lighter gray and also to a blue as well. So just kind of make the workspace kind of work for you, so you can customize it the way you need to. So back to text. In the text tool here, I'm going to choose this option, and you'll notice that if you haven't worked with text before, the toolbar, the property bar here at the top, has a lot of options to work with. Okay, so first thing off is really what kind of font do you want to use. So I'm going to go to the very first font dialog here, this drop down, and I can see a little preview of what the different text looks like. I can see, let's go with something a little friendly and a little fun. So I'm going to scroll down here and go to, oh, this looks pretty good. This one's fairly large. The next thing is I can choose the size that I want to work with, if I wanted the font to be bold, the alignment, and so on. I'm just going to click, though, because I want text to start right about there. And I can see from the cursor the size is probably a little small, so let me, before I even start typing, I'm actually going to make this 60, and bold is good. So let's just type in season's greetings, or happy winter, or how's the weather, or whatever you like. And I'm going to select this because, you know what, I'm not sure if that's the color I want. Over here on the Materials palette, it's over on the right-hand side, I have the option to change the outline color, which is the foreground here, and also the fill color of this text. If I choose to, I can also set it to black and white, and you'll see that the text now has a black outline and a white fill. Now, in my case, I actually would like to have the white be, you know what, let's pick a color in the actual photograph. I'm going to go ahead and choose, with the eyedropper, it's automatically selected. I'm going to choose a nice kind of blue in the scarf. So let's choose a blue, and I'll say OK. And you can see it's automatically been updated here as well. And in my case, I don't really want an outline. So I can go up to the text options here. You'll notice that there is one for stroke width. And what that means is how wide or how thick an outline that you want on your font. If I make this 0, and I'm going to just hit the down arrow here to make that a 0 option, you'll notice that that outline is no longer there. Okay, so that's just a couple of ways to start creating text. Now, as you look over into the far right, there's again more options, and that's really for kind of spacing your letters out, or if you have multiple lines and so on. We're going to leave that alone for now and just stick with fonts and colors and creating something fairly easy. So I've added some text. Up here in the toolbar, again, I'm just going to make sure I apply those changes. I've done making changes to my font. And I made a boo-boo because I was working before we started. Now, it's not really an accident, it's actually a feature because one of the options you actually have in the font area is you can choose how to create that text. So what I was doing earlier is I was creating a selection, so I could actually use that font area to fill it in. I can add it to perhaps use paint brushes to create a different effect. It's not really what I intended to do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back and undo that last step and go ahead and add my text again. Kind of accidentally learned something today. So again, one of the things I want to make sure, and it is on by default, is that vector is selected. And what that means is when I now create my text, let's call it Seasons Greetings 2. And I choose the arrow at the top here, the Apply Changes. It's now fully editable vector, which means I can resize that, I can reposition it, I can go ahead and over here in the Layers palette see exactly where it is. So it's created it as a vector. And if I just open that up again, you'll see a little plus sign right next to it. Let me get back in here. There's a plus sign on the Layers palette right next to that vector. And I can see exactly what I've typed. If I wanted to go ahead and edit it again, I can simply double click on that text area, select my text if I want to, retype it, or perhaps even just change the colors. So let's go ahead and change the colors back to kind of a black and white. Okay? So again, if you choose to create your text as vector, completely editable. You can go back at any time and update it, change it as you see fit. The other options here are more for the quality of the text or the direction that you want it to flow vertically, horizontally, and so on. So again, a lot of options. I don't want to talk too much about text, but just know that you have the ability to kind of create your own and customize it as you see fit. So I can apply those changes up here in the, again, the top kind of left. You hit the little checkbox. Okay. And I can choose the pick tool on the toolbox over here. So I can reposition this. Maybe let's make that a little bit larger and move that right over there. Okay, so in about 10 minutes we went through. I simply added a frame that fit my portrait image. I went ahead and added some text twice. Just for the fun of it. And perhaps now I want to do something a little more kind of special effect, just to give it a little extra punch. So what I'll do is, a couple of ways I can do this. I'm going to actually go to the Effects menu, which is one option, and I can go ahead and apply different types of effects to different elements. In this case, I'm actually working with vector text. So when I choose to apply, in this case, a 3D effect for drop shadow, I'm going to get a dialog, and you'll see this the first time. It just wants to let me know that it'll apply it, but it's going to change it to a raster layer, much like what a photo is. So I can't then go back in later and start changing the font or the text or so on. So it's actually going to convert it. That's why you get a little warning, just to let you know I'll apply a special effect, but it's going to kind of change the way that works. So I have a preview. Actually, let me turn the preview on here so we can see a better close-up of how this works. And I can see with the angle here, I can apply the offset of that shadow, and I'll see it in the before and after of the preview. I can choose how transparent that drop shadow is, as well as the blur, and in this case, color. So let's choose maybe a nice blue instead. So I can change the color of the drop shadow to a blue, and you'll see it here in the preview, and you're also seeing it on my actual card. If I want to, I can also choose to change and put that shadow itself on a different layer if I wanted to have a little more flexibility on what I did with it later. But you know what? I think it looks great. We're going to say OK. So that is the 10-minute card. Let me just zoom in here. Ta-da! OK. That was done pretty quickly with mostly just a picture frame. So what happens now if we're talking postcards, I actually want it to be a postcard size, or I want it to print at a particular size. Right now what I've done is used my photo as a reference. I could probably take this and have it printed as a 5x7 or 4x6 or whatever and have it just mailed that way or framed or whatever. But let's say I want to create something that I want to print, and I want to add multiple photos to it. I want to do a bit of a layout or a collage and have more elements to it, and I want to do it myself. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new file. Now before I do that, what I'd like to make sure is that we don't have too many problems. No, everyone's got sound and quality and good. So there is a question. I did mention, I believe, at the outset, but if not, I am recording this presentation right now. So no worries if you can't hang out with us for the whole event, or perhaps, I know I tend to talk quickly and like to show a lot of things. So you will be able to access this recording later using the exact same link that you received to register. So tomorrow, I believe, the recording will be available, and you'll be able to click back, link to it, and preview it at your leisure. Okay? So no worries if you're frantically taking notes. We will be sure that you can access this again at a later date. All right, so what I was going to do now is kind of get away from working with just one image and start working on something that I can create from scratch. So what I'm going to do is, rather than open a photo, what I'm going to do is create a new file. So I'm over here in the standard toolbar under New. There's a little symbol for it. Or again, I can go File and New. And I'm presented with a dialog. And here I can choose what dimensions I want. How big or what size do I want this new file to be? What resolution do I want it to be? I'm actually planning on printing this, so I'm going to leave it at a 300 DPI, or pixels per inch, dots per inch. Now, in the first question I actually asked myself, let's be honest, is what size is a postcard? I wasn't quite sure. So rather than find one and measure it, I went into the presets. And in the presets, we have a number of different options for anyone who's creating something, say, for a wallpaper or desktop background. There's dimensions preset in here. If you're creating web graphics, banners and buttons and so on, there's presets as well. But if I come down, there's different options here, and one of them is postcard. So postcard, horizontal and vertical. Now, postcard is really, it's kind of relative. What sizing that actually means, where you are, if it's if the dimensions are different, you can feel free to customize those. So in my case, if I wanted this to be, for instance, a special print, and I wanted it to be, let's say, 8.5 by 4 inches, I can then go ahead and save that preset. So what I did is I altered the dimensions here. I hit the drop arrow, and I have a little diskette. It's kind of hidden away actually, but I have a little diskette save option, and I can now say, this is my custom postcard. Okay? And I can choose to add a little description if I need to, and so on. So I can say OK, and just so you can see, it actually records all of the settings that are in that dialog right now. So I can say OK, and then what I have is access to that new template or project anytime I want to. Okay, so it's just a little tip for yourself. I'm going to go back to just the standard kind of horizontal postcard. It's really just a 4x6 file, and I'm going to say OK. So now I have a blank document or a blank canvas to work with, and again, if you're not familiar with PaintShop, you're seeing a kind of a checkerboard print. What all that means is that I'm working on a transparent area. So if I saved this to the web, I would have really nothing to look at. What I want to do, though, is start adding the elements that I want to work with together. So in my case, I'm going to take this first image, this first photo. I'm just going to open that one up, and I was fiddling with it. So what I want to do is undo all of that. So I'm going to go to, there it is, the Edit menu and Revert. And what that will do is anything I've done since I opened this, or since I last hit Save, it'll revert that file. So it's right back to the way it was. Okay. So I have this image. I'm actually going to copy it. Actually, I'm going to select it first. So I'm going to Control A. I'm using shortcut keys in this case, but you can also go to the menu. So it would be a Select All, and you'll see there's little shortcut keys next to each of these commands. I'm going to do Control C, and if you go to the Edit menu, you can see that's Copy, and then I'm also going to Paste. So for me, rather than go to menus, I just do Control A to copy, Control A to select, Control C to copy, and then in this new document that I've created, I'm going to paste it, and that's Control V. Okay, so it plops it right down into the center of my new file. Not exactly where I'd like it to be, so I'm going to choose to move this around using the Pick tool. On the left-hand side, it's the arrow key, and I'm going to move and reposition that. If I'd like to resize it, I can grab the corners here and just resize that to kind of get it where I want it to be. Now, again, if I wanted to add multiple photos, I can repeat this process as many times as I want to add as many elements or photos as I want. So just to show you that, let me go ahead and open up another one. So this is another image I'd like to use, and again, I'm going to just copy that, and I'm going to paste it. Now you'll notice this image is a lot bigger. It was a different size, so it kind of took over my whole screen basically. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to use that Pick tool again to resize it. So it's kind of really big. It's hard to navigate here. So I tend to go over to zoom out. So I'm just going to go to the panning tool here, and I'm going to fit this whole thing. Actually, let me zoom out. There we go. There we go. So now I can see exactly where this image ends and where it begins. And I can go ahead and kind of grab that guy, move it around, get it where it needs to be, theoretically. There we go. Get over there, you. Thank you. All right, so let's fit this thing back where we were. Okay. So that's a little tip to yourself, because sometimes it's easier to resize images before you copy and paste. Just a note. So one thing, if you haven't done much with multiple photos or layered or compositions or collage work, this is where layers make a big difference. So right now you'll see that I have two separate layers. I actually have the new file I started with, and I added a photo. I added another one, and the order of this depends what you see first. Now, a lot of you folks are probably very, very proficient with this, but just for anyone who's new to more of this type of editing, keep in mind that if whatever you see at the very top is what's going to be shown at the very top. Think of it like a stack of papers or a stack of stencils. If I wanted to move this photo so it rested behind the family shot, I can simply reorder them by dragging the order of those layers to determine what gets seen first. There's also a little eyeball for preview, so I can turn things on or off if I wanted to see before or after if I wanted to. So again, how you add things, if you don't see it, take a look at your layers palette. It may just be hiding behind something. Okay, so you can go ahead and kind of rearrange these, move them, position them where you want. I'm not going to do too much stuff with this quite yet because I wanted to show you, before I do anything too crazy and creative, that's my plan anyway, is a little practicality. So what happens when we start adding all sorts of different elements together, whether it's text or picture tubes or other decorations or photos? Getting them to line up is sometimes problematic. So rather than trying to eyeball it and see if you can get it right every time, what I tend to do is, or what I recommend you do, is when you select multiple layers, and how I did that is I select a layer, I'm holding down the Control key, and I'm selecting the second image underneath where it says Raster 2. If I hold down the Control key while I do that, it actually selects both those elements, and you'll see that there's a bounding box around all of them. You'll also notice that the options bar here at the top has changed. So anytime that you have more than one object selected, you now have alignment options. So if you've ever wondered how to perfectly align something to the center, or in this case, make sure that they align tops or bottoms. So what I'd like to do is make sure that these two images align the bottom. So both bottoms are aligned. Now you'll notice that this image shifted up rather than this little guy shifting down. Well, let me show you how that works. So when you select something, let me make sure I do this right. I'm selecting the family photo first and then any subsequent elements afterwards. That means it's going to use that very first thing you selected as its reference. So I want everything now to align with the bottom. It's going to use this as the main one to kind of measure against. So let's hope this works. Yay! Okay, so depending on the order you select things, it'll use that as its reference and align everything else with that particular object. The other handy thing here is that you can also align elements vertically or have them align on top of each other horizontally, or send everything to center the canvas. You can also, if this is perfect too, if you have different types of text, or perhaps you're making web buttons and you want to make them all the same size. So I can choose to make both these elements the same width and height, or just the same height or width, as well as over here I can choose to space things out. So if I wanted these objects spaced evenly across my canvas, let's choose space evenly horizontally, you'll notice that it shifted this element out, and I have the exact same amount of space on the outside edge, in between these two objects, and on the far right. So there's a lot of fantastic tools here to get the kind of accuracy that you want for layout for a project like this. Okay, so I know I'm talking a lot practicalities here, but really it's once you get used to some of the alignment tools, the way some of the layers work, even how the text works, you can become very, very efficient at creating projects like this. Okay, so that's just kind of making things line up and getting the elements that you want on your page, but how do we bring it all together? Well, there's a number of ways that we can do this. One thing that I'm going to do, just to kind of show you guys, let me actually align these to the bottom, and just because I'm going to move this little image over just for now and shrink it down. I just technically wanted a second image in here. I wasn't really keen on this one, but there you go. What do we do when we want a nice background? That picture frame had a nice kind of, graphic stuff going on. It had a sky, it had trees. I don't really want to do that much crazy stuff. I just don't want a plain background, and I don't really want a photo for a background. What I'd like to have is a bit of area for text and something kind of nice, that these pictures can sit on top of. Well, one thing I'd like to point out is other content that we have in PaintShop Pro that's already there. You just may not have discovered it yet. Overall, on the materials palette, we have, again, these foreground and background swatches. The tabs here at the top, and it may look a little different depending on the version that you're using, but quite often you'll see that you can choose your colors from different types of swatches. Now this is just straight, foreground and background colors that we can pick, but on these swatches here as well, we can create and add custom ones. So whether that's a custom color that we want, a custom gradient that we've created, or in my case, a custom pattern. So I'm going to go ahead, I've actually already created one, but I'm going to create, I'm not going to create from new, but actually, yeah, let's create something new. And just so I can find it again, we're going to call it Evelyn's. And I want to create a new type of background. I'm kind of cheating a little bit because what I'm going to do is use not colors and not gradients, but I'm going to create one from a pattern. Now in this pattern area, there's a whole number of different types of backgrounds that are fantastic. I've used them for different, I've actually used them for invitations, I've used them for scrapbooking, I've done it with just interesting kind of textures that you can create as well. So in this list, there are quite a few. There's actually one you'll see I have found a snowflake one that I particularly like, and that was here. I have a number of different ones too. Let's just go ahead and pick, let's go with this snowflake option here. And I can also apply different texture, so perhaps even just a plain color can have a different texture in here. And in the textures area, this is where you can create really fantastic overlays for photos, for paintbrushed or art media projects. You can create different paper textures to go with it. So there's quite a bit worth exploring in here, just to really customize and give your projects a lot of feel to them, a lot of depth to them. So I've actually altered this this texture here. So I'm going to say OK. And now it has added it to my little swatch panel. Okay, so it's a way for me to quickly, easily access it as often as I want. So what I'm going to do is I actually want to fill this entire background with that snowflake pattern. So on the very bottom layer here, the very base raster layer one that sits underneath everything, I'm actually going to fill this. So I'm going to come over to the fill tool on the toolbox. So it's called flood fill. F is the shortcut key for that. I'm going to choose flood fill. And now instead of choosing a color to work with, I want to choose this particular snowflake one that I created. Okay, so I'm going to fill the entire background with that material. So again, you can create your own. You can actually capture them from images that you may have taken. If you've taken even a photo of pavement, you can create that into its own texture. You can create your own patterns as well, or just kind of modify what is already available to you. So this is getting there. What I really would like to, though, is kind of bring it together. I'd like to be able to leave a message, and I don't really want to have just plain text on here. It'd be nice if it had somewhere to sit, like we see with kind of scrapbooks or different framed collages and so on. So before I do the text, I want to create kind of a nice shaded area. So what I'm going to do is use the selection tool to do that. So on the toolbox on the left, I'm going to choose from one of the selection tools here. I'm actually going to go ahead and go with just a rectangular option, but again, choosing selection tool or any tool gives me different presets or different options I can work with. So if I wanted perhaps a rounded rectangle, I can create that right here. So I'm just going to drag this selected area in here. And I'm going to fill that with the color, but I really like this background. So I would like to make it semi-transparent. That would be kind of a cool effect. So I'm going to go to the fill bucket, again, the flood fill tool on the toolbox. I'm going to choose that. And instead of going with a pattern, I'm going to switch back to kind of black and white. And white is now, I've just switched this around, so white is my foreground. And instead of filling it, like right now, if I fill it, I get, well, it didn't really do what I wanted for me. You know why? Because I should have created another layer first. One reason is because now what it's doing when I fill, it's missing some of this area. It's trying to fill within an existing kind of content in this shape, which isn't really what I wanted it to do. So what I'm going to do is over in the layers palette, and the smart thing to do in my case is to create more layers rather than less so that I always have the flexibility to change my mind or move things around. So on the layers palette, now if you're in a previous version than X4, the new layer tool may be found at the top of this particular palette, so just keep an eye out for new layer. I'm going to create a new raster layer, and I'm just going to be a bit lazy and not give it a name. So now in the selection, what it does is it's selecting and filling the area on the currently selected layer. So it's a blank one. Now it's just plopped that white in. But what I wanted was something that was a little bit transparent, which would be nice. So I have an option now to do that. Here in the layers palette, I can bring that opacity down so I can start to see that background a little more clearly. Okay. There is another way to do it as well, so let me undo that particular step. And so even before I fill an area, up here again in the options, I have the ability to change the opacity that I want here. Okay. The only disadvantage here is that once I make that fill area and I kind of move on to the next thing or change tools, I don't really have the ability, do I? No, I don't really have the ability to go ahead and adjust it. So once I come back and I say, oh, you know what, that's not quite transparent enough, once you use the fill tool, it's kind of, you really have to undo your step to go back. Whereas if I use the layer, so let me go ahead and undo back to where we were. And I'm going to make this opacity 100% again, so we're right back to where we were. If I fill this with a solid white and use the layer palette, I can again come back at a later time and say, you know what, I'm going to adjust that again, and I have a lot more flexibility. That's kind of the advantage of working with layers, one of the many advantages working with layers gives you. Okay, So I'm going to deselect that because I have my little marching ants, but I'm kind of done with this space. The shortcut for that is Control D on your keyboard. But you can always go to the selections panel as well and choose select none. Okay? All right, so where we go, we've got a little more going on here. We're going to go back and add text, much like we did before. I'm going to go ahead and add text to this area. And let's say seasons, greetings. I said, is anyone with Smith on the line? I apologize, but you've got a very lovely last name, and we use it a lot. Okay, there we go. So this text didn't quite align the way I wanted. It's kind of running over the edge here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this text just by clicking and dragging. And in the text properties up here at the top, I'm going to go ahead and change the alignment to center. And I'm also going to reduce the size, I think, a little bit. Let's see what a 48 point works with. That's not too bad. And this is where you can see the advantage of using some of these other text editing options. So things such as leading, if I increase the spacing, you'll notice that the line spacing here has changed. I've got greater distance between each line. I can do that. I can also adjust the kerning, which you'll notice now adjust the spacing between each letter as well. Okay. So if I needed to squish something, I could. Okay. Now that's all I'm going to play with for now. I'm going to apply those changes. So I'm just going to hit the check mark there. And now let me just reposition this where I wanted it to go. Okay. So that doesn't leave you with, I mean, we don't have to end here, I should say. What we can do, again, is start adding maybe some special effects to it, maybe some extra elements to it. One thing that we touched on earlier was picture tubes. We also have, picture frames. Now you know what I'm going to mention next, picture tubes, to start adding different embellishments or different objects that you want to perhaps work with or decorate with. And that can be found on the toolbox here. You'll see there's picture tube. And what I get now when I select that is in the options bar at the top here a drop list, and I can sort by different categories as well. Now what you have in here, I believe by default in X4 is, I believe it's 150 different tubes. If you have the ultimate version, when you installed the extra picture tubes, you won't necessarily see an extra category in this list because we've actually tried to place them in the categories that made the most sense. But you actually have, I believe, over 350 new tubes. Okay, and they've been put into those different categories that you see there. So just in case you installed it and you didn't see anything new, not to worry, they're actually sitting right where they're supposed to be, so you're good. So one of the ones I like using is the embellishments area, and that's generally kind of scrapbook-like, or in this case I've got options such as stitching or thread. There's rivets that I can use as well as different buttons and so on. So if I wanted to simply there we go. I was working on a vector layer. So here's another tip, actually. Didn't I just say create more layers? So this is why I leave my reminders on. Right now, if I wanted to add a picture tube, whenever you add that, it's going to add it to the currently selected layer. In my case, I was still working on the vector layer where I was working with text. And if I wanted to add raster to that, it's going to want to convert it. I don't want that. I'd like to be able to go back and edit my text later if I choose. So I'm going to go ahead and add another new layer. And this time, I'm going to pay attention to what I'm doing and call it buttons. Actually, let's just say I'm going to put one button on here, just to show you what it looks like. So in the, again, options area here, I can choose the size of the button, the distance between them or the step, and then different types of placement or where they're basically going to land and how it's going to select, because div tubes can have multiple images in them. So for instance, if I choose a button here, the next time I click, I may get something slightly different. Okay, so I can choose to change the order of that and so on. Now I added, let's see, 1, 2, 3, well, let's say a bunch of buttons to this new layer. If I move those around or I want to change them, they're all now going to travel together, which is fine if I wanted to get, a group of them together to work with, but I'd like to keep them separate so I can place individual ones where I want. So let me delete that, or actually delete off with my keyboard, just hit delete, and I'm going to go ahead and add one button. Okay, I want to have a couple of them here, so let me just add a new layer, and so I can pay attention. We're going to call it button 2. That way I know what I'm doing. Okay, and I can choose the pick tool here, so now I can actually rearrange them separately. Now you'll notice that they're actually disappearing behind that photo that I have placed. So again, what I'm going to do is in the layers palette here, I'm going to drag these guys up. So I'm going to hold Control to select both of them. And I'm actually going to drag them to the very top of my layers list here. So now when I move these guys around, they'll actually sit on top of my different elements. So let me just move these guys around a little bit just to do something mildly entertaining here. There we go. And that is just a couple of things that you can do. When you're all said and done, if you wanted to add additional effects to these different elements here, so for instance, this photo, in the original one I had created, let me just open up the sample here for you. There we go. I had done a kind of a black and white effect on this image. Okay, and I did that as I was working. So I had the picture frame already there. I'd started adding text. I thought, you know what, this could use a little something else. So what I'm going to do now, so I'm going to go back to my project here, is if I wanted to, say, add a different effect to one of these elements. So let's say I did want to do the kind of black and white colorized effect. I can continue to do that. So what I can do, there we go. There is a question I just noticed too, that one of the things that we did in X4 is when you opened photos, this was a setting that was turned off by default in previous versions. You'll notice at the top, the way I'm switching back and forth between these photos, I apologize for not kind of explaining that, is that there's little tabs at the very top. So I can then access these images without having to drag them and move them around. You'll notice too that on the far right, I can also use arrow keys to kind of scroll through. So if I have more images than I can see here, I can use this little arrow to get to them, or I can close individual ones as I go. If you don't enjoy that way of working, if it's not working for you, up in the window area, take a look at that window menu, and there's a tabbed Documents. If I turn that off, all of my photos are now layered, which was a default in previous versions. So if that's been kind of frustrating for you, or you're wondering why things changed or where things were, that was a setting in the window menu for tabbed Documents. So you can flip back and forth depending on how you're working. I tend to actually flip back and forth. Sometimes I need some structure in my life, and I can't keep dragging photos back and forth. I start losing them. In other cases, I prefer working where I can see images side by side or so on. So window menu, tab Documents, and that'll allow you the flexibility to kind of go back and forth depending on which way you prefer working at that time. Okay. Now, I was going to say, just because I think this is a nice effect and I'd like to show you something a little bit kind of cool, is I'm going to show you two things. The first one is, let's go ahead, I'm going to choose the small image over here, and I want to add a drop shadow effect. So again, under Effects, the 3D effects, I can go ahead, I can choose different, really any of the options I want, but I like a nice simple drop shadow. In this case, I'm going to choose, and I can see the preview, I can see kind of where that drop shadow is going to be. I'm going to go with a black shadow in this case, and I have the ability here, if you're kind of a visual person and you wanted to drag this little kind of line around, it determines the angle and the offset that shadow is going to appear. Or if you're kind of like me, I like things to be somewhat exact, so I know where they are, you can then enter those numerically if you choose. So that's one thing which we did previously. I just want to show it to you on a different element. The second thing is if I want to do that black and white effect that you saw in the previous example, that's pretty easy, and it doesn't have to be in this kind of example. You can do it just on a single photo if you choose to. The trick is when whatever photo you have open, if you right-click on it, on that layer in the layer palette, you get the option to duplicate. So I'm going to duplicate it, which gives me the identical image, one sitting right on top of the other. On the uppermost, what I do is apply a black and white effect. So let's go to the effects menu again. I'm going to go to photo effects, and I'm going to choose black and white film. Okay. So black and white film is really very powerful because what you can do is based on you can have it suggest a particular color, and it uses this channel mixer to essentially help determine the black and white. So think of it like if you had a colored lens on your camera, what colors become darker versus lighter changes. So in this case, if I wanted to go with a red filter, you'll notice that red tones such as skin become very, very light. If I choose blues, you'll notice that blue tones, so in this case the skin tone becomes darker, red tones become darker, blues become quite light. So you can have it suggest a color for you, or you can then experiment and you can get dramatically different results depending on the kind of color or effect that you're choosing. I don't want to go quite that bold. Let's do something, I'm going to have it suggest a color for me. Okay, that's not too bad. If I wanted to kind of add a little more depth to that, I'm going to choose Clarify. There we go, and I'm going to say OK. So right now, everything you see is black and white because we're dealing with layers. So underneath this, it's actually hiding what's underneath because it's sitting right on top. If I turn the visibility off, you can see underneath, there's our color image. So the quick and easy way to do this, we will be covering masking and so on in a future session, but without even getting into those options, using the eraser tool is a very, very easy way to go. So let me zoom in a little bit here so we can see kind of what I'm working on, because I won't finish the entire thing today, just to give you an idea of how it works. So using the eraser tool, what I can do is choose different types of shapes. You can actually customize all of your brushes if you wish as well. In the options panel, because I have a brush selected, I can choose from various number of presets. I can actually also create my own from a selection or from a blank file. This is the default options, just a nice kind of anti-alias style blurry circle. But if I go down, you'll notice that I start having different shapes. Now these are great if you want to do, say, a distressed effect to a photo or start blending it into a different area. But in my case, I really want to just quickly and easily remove color, or erase the black and white image so it's exposing what's underneath. Now that's pretty harsh because that's at, if you'll notice, 100%. So it's erasing every pixel in this area. And it's kind of a little too much for me. So what I can do is I can undo that step, or if I just made a mistake and erased something like this, like I didn't mean to, part of the face area, if I right-click using my mouse and the eraser tool, it actually will add that detail back in. So don't feel like you have to undo every little mistake, or you realize after you've done some work, it's gone. If you left-click with the eraser, it removes pixels. If you right-click with your mouse, it'll add it back in. Okay, so it's a great way to work with just a single tool. You can actually go in and add and remove just the areas that you want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the opacity a bit here because I don't want it to get rid of everything. Let's bring that right down. I just want it to get a bit of a hint. Okay, so I'll just erase the areas that I want. The other thing, actually no, that's probably the best way to go in this case. We're going to get into a little more advanced object selections, extractions, masking, and so on in the next webinar, which will be in January. We'll send out an invite for that as soon as it's ready. So I can continue to go on really just to add accents to certain areas. So this is great if you want to do that hand-tinted photo effect. There's several different techniques for that, but just for the first timer, I say, you know what, if you can make an eraser work for you, then it's instant gratification on doing something very cool very, very quickly. So let me bring that back, fit to screen. So it's a bit of a, it is a bit of a hodgepodge affair. I apologize. I get a little carried away and I want to do all sorts of things. But again, you're not limited to just placing items and dropping in decorations or so on. You can do as much as you want in here with as many layers as you want, with different special effects, with different blending options. There's really a ton of options. We're going to get into some more of those advanced ones as we continue the series. This is a monthly webinar series. But just for your own an option last month was makeovers. And if you weren't able to access that, I believe we have a link on our corel.com/webinars page. But we can make sure we'll repost that recording on our Facebook page. So on PaintShop Pro Facebook page, we do, as well as on corel.com, we do advertise and notify people when we are having new webinars. I do encourage you, though, to sign up for the Zoom In newsletter. So on Corel.com, we can actually, you can sign up for newsletters, so tutorials, webinar links, all sorts of